G'day, second one in quick succession about Casper's racist uncle. This one is, however, shorter. Happy days. So, as per the title, we're talking here in part about old mate $1's ideas about race and IQ, which he's given us insight into a few times recently. I got looking into this after what he said post his venue getting cancelled on him in New Zealand. Most notably and comprehensively though, was a little while back on the Rubin report. So let's take a quick look.
But is there evidence that it's genetic? Yes. I'm not a geneticist.
Yes.
So genetic in what regard? I mean, if we took the brain of a 25-year-old black man and the brain of a 25-year-old white man, what is it that they're doing that...
They're different sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you take the average black kid, have them raised by an upper-class middle white family or a Jewish family and so on, they're going to end up at about 85. So it does not appear to be strongly environmental. I don't believe that there's no environmental causes. Isn't this, it's like, well, first of all, it's an important fact, and we are tortured as a society by group differences. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that.
So we can
again, people, if you can prove me wrong, I am beyond thrilled. I will apologize to everyone, although again, having had all the experts on...
Yeah, so essentially Stefan is promoting scientific racism in that he says that the measurable gap in IQ between race groups is mostly due to genetic differences between said races, and as well that this IQ gap is due to differences in brain size. Stefan also really wants to be proven wrong on this, which, well, I've got great news for him. I'm about to. Just before we go there though, it's worth pointing out that discussed most often by Stefan here and by others elsewhere as well, is what's called the black-white IQ gap, i.e. the gap between IQ scores for black and white Americans. This gap usually forms the basis of discussion and research, largely because it's a gap between two commonly compared groups that have vastly different lived experiences in the US, of course. Anyway, so, the gaps between race groups do exist. That is supported by evidence. No argument from me there. However, the latter two suggestions that these differences are genetic and down to brain size are, technically speaking, horseshit. In the video description on the Rubin Report video, Stefan's team, air quotes, has provided 3 links to sources to back up his claims. 2 of these are links essentially referring to the same source, i.e. a paper and a wiki summary of said paper. The paper in question is a report published by the American Psychological Association, which was intended to try and clarify things post the publication of the infamous bell curve, which in part called for policy based on the supposed inevitability of IQs between the races, and the predictably and possibly fairly rabid response to it. The report explains what is and isn't known about IQ and race, or what was and wasn't in the dim dark days of 1996 anyway, and was actually a pretty interesting read. It talks about different measures of intelligence, the usefulness and validity of assessing IQ in populations that might have different priorities, the correlations between what we might call success and IQ, lots of stuff. Honestly, go check it out. But I digress, because the question here is, does the report back the view that the gaps in IQ between race groups, or more specifically the black-white gap, are due to genetic factors? And, well, no it doesn't. Admittedly, it isn't until close to the end of the paper that this point is addressed specifically, but the quote of interest is as follows. It is sometimes suggested that the black-white differential in psychometric intelligence is partly due to genetic differences. There is not much direct evidence on this point, but what little there is fails to support the genetic hypothesis. Yep, that's the source Stefan cites on the issue, flat disagreeing with him. There was, at the time of publication, no reason to conclude that the black-white IQ gap was due to genetics, which is something I know Stefan is going to be thrilled to learn, because I know that line about proving him wrong wasn't at all disingenuous. No need to stop there though, because 1996 was over 20 years ago after all. Science has gone further since this paper was released, and oh look, here's one of those ridiculously good meta-studies, one of those things which does the hard work of sifting through the available work on the subject for us. This one, published in 2016, is called Race Differences in IQ, Hans Eysenk's Contribution to the Debate in Light of Subsequent Research, Hans Eysenck being one of the early proponents of the theory that genetic differences accounted for the lion's share of IQ gaps between races. The quote of import though, several lines of research, notably racial admixture studies, racial crossing studies involving interracial parenting or adoption, and especially investigations using more recent techniques of molecular genetics, have provided evidence suggesting that the black-white IQ gap is not determined significantly by genetic factors. So yeah, not only did Stefan's 1996 source not support the position he took on the sit-down, science since this time has collected evidence that directly contradicts it. Stefan will be so happy. So it almost seems mute at this point to discuss the issue of brain size now, but fuck it, let's do it anyway, cause it's fun. The second source provided by Team Stefan is an article titled The Mismeasure of Science, which explores the story of two scientists, Morton and Gould. Morton was a dude from back in the day who measured cranial and therefore brain sizes among races, concluding that there were differences in brain sizes between them. Gould then came along and made the case that Morton, being a prejudiced chap, had imparted his bias onto his findings. This paper, though, disputes Gould and concludes that while Morton was biased, his experimentation was not, and that his original conclusion is supported. What a great story. So yeah, this one is here to support Stefan's point about brain size, which it does, but it does not, however, discuss implications for IQ, only to say that Morton figured brain size implied intelligence. Well, you can probably guess where this is going. Oops. Here's a 2010 paper concluding the race differences in brain size, even if these were entirely of genetic origin, leave unexplained 91 to 95% of the black-white IQ gap. So even if some races have smaller brains than others, it doesn't say much at all about their IQ anyway. So yeah, Stefan's sources don't support his positions here, and we have sources supporting, in fact, the alternate position. IQ differences between race groups did not appear to be genetic in 96. We now have evidence to support that they are not. Beauty. Now, there were other things that were said in this video that were, well, wrong, but I'm leaving them out because I want to talk about another couple of things instead. Toward the end of the video, Molyneux and Rubin wax lyrical about his upcoming book, called The Art of the Argument, and they get into some familiar territory about how we as a society just need to learn to calmly disagree. Now that's a pretty rich position to take given his past, but whatever. It is now, of course, something that folks on the fringe love to say. If they can convince people that there's a need to discuss their ideas, it makes shutting them down or dismissing them out of turn harder, and to be honest, they've been kinda good at it. Lots of us feel the need to fact-check this bullshit, for example. But the thing is, it's kind of great when we can reach a point where we can and do shut this shit down before it even starts. The pseudoscience of scientific racism is something that's not new, for example, and it has been consistently shown to be a load of old bollocks since the very early days of the practice. As such, I would ask Stefan if he is really that surprised that people are a bit sick of having this so-called debate. Stefan and others, of course, are trying for the umpteenth time to resurrect something that has been used fallaciously to try and justify literal supremacy among races. In that same vein, is it that surprising that people start to get pissed off when you talk about how tragic it is that society is divided down racial lines in an interview that consists mostly of calls to one of the most famous attempts to validate those divisions? Like, you gotta be kidding me. I always say at the end of my videos that thoughts, comments and corrections from the well-intentioned are welcome, and that's true. Debate and the exchange of ideas is incredibly important, but it's that well-intentioned qualifier that matters. Stefan cannot be considered well-intentioned. A well-intentioned discussion about levelling the playing field between demographics is kind of the left's whole thing. The problem here is that we can't start from a well-debunked pseudoscience. And these calls to ignorance piss me off just about as much as anything else. I mean, this shit is his fucking job. He's got resources at his disposal. Shit, he even goes to other countries and gets paid to dump on people with more melanin than him. Me, on the other hand, I'm just some dude with a microphone doing this in his spare time. If I can find refutations to his narrative, in his own sources no less, he can too. So bollocks to this whole I'm just trying to help out and discuss things idea, just in case anyone missed the sarcasm from before. As a closer, I want to give an example of another IQ gap. Maybe it'll help people understand why this is a really unhelpful thing to talk about, full stop. Here's a screen grab of a paper discussing how right-wingers tend to have lower IQs than the converse. Now, there were nuances suggested in this paper. There are papers since suggesting that this gap might not be as significant as previously thought, but let's channel Stefan and ignore that shit because it's not fucking convenient. And what can I say? Reading this was painful for me. I just felt so badly for those poor right-wingers. It's not their fault, it's just reality, and it's one that we need to face up to. Oh, what's that? What should we do with this information, you ask? Well, I don't know. I'm not a politician. I just want to have a discussion. I'll let you, fellow reactionaries, fill in the blanks all on your own. Thoughts, comments and corrections from the well-intentioned, welcome as always. That was Cheers.